Thank you everyone doing service, making the meeting possible. My name is Andy. I'm a very grateful recovered alcoholic. It's good to be here with you and good to be sober. And this week we are indeed starting on chapter 2, There is a Solution. So over the last few weeks we've looked at the preamble, forewords and Bill's story and the doctor's opinion in the big book. And there was a lot of history in Bill's story that we filled in. So there'll be less of that in this because we're now getting into what the actual solution is. So we're on page 17 of the 4th edition of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, Chapter 2, There is a Solution. We of Alcoholics Anonymous. So once again, right at the outset, multiple authors, which I think is a really important thing. We've at the beginning, it's in the foreword, it says we of. And here again, we of Alcoholics Anonymous know thousands of men and women who were once just as hopeless as Bill. Nearly all of them have recovered. They have solved the drink problem. And in the very first edition of our book, it didn't say thousands, it said 100 because that's what it was. And it did say in the first printing, it said all have recovered, but obviously program of honesty, so there were a couple of changes that were made in the first 164 pages, and that was one of them. It was because not everybody did, and by then though it was thousands, and that was the thing, and the ones that didn't were in the minority. We are average Americans. All sections of this country and many of its occupations are represented, as well as many political, economic, social and religious backgrounds. We are people who normally would not mix, but there exists among us a fellowship, a friendliness and an understanding which is indescribably wonderful. We are like the passengers of a great liner the moment after rescue from shipwreck, when camaraderie, joyousness and democracy pervade the vessel from steerage to captain's table. Steerage being the cheapest seats on a ship, and captain's table the most expensive, the most important. So in that moment, you're all one, you're all the same, trapped in that situation. But unlike the feelings of the ship's passengers, however, our joy in escape from disaster does not subside as we go our individual ways. The feeling of having shared in a common peril is one element in the powerful cement which binds us. But that in itself would never have held us together as we are now joined. The tremendous fact for every one of us is that we have discovered a common solution. We have a way on which we can absolutely agree and upon which we can join in brotherly and harmonious action. This is the great news this book carries to those who suffer from alcoholism. And yes, it is indeed. An illness of this sort, and we have come to believe it as an illness, involves those about us in a way no other human sickness can, and that's a real key thing with alcoholism, isn't it? Our spiritual sickness and the effects of what we do have massive impacts on those that are around us, whereas other diseases don't have that. If a person has cancer, all are sorry for him, and no one is angry or hurt. But not so with the alcoholic illness, for with it there goes annihilation of all the things worthwhile in life. It engulfs all whose lives touch the sufferers. It brings misunderstanding, fierce resentment, financial insecurity, disgusted friends and employers, warped lives of blameless children, sad wives and parents. Anyone can increase the list. We hope this volume will inform and comfort those who are or who may be affected. There are many. So when they wrote the book, they were hoping it would help both those groups of people, those that suffered from alcoholism and the families of those around them. Highly competent psychiatrists who have dealt with us have found it sometimes impossible to persuade an alcoholic to discuss his situation without reserve. Strangely enough, wives, parents and intimate friends usually find us more unapproachable than do the psychiatrist and the doctor. But the ex-problem drinker, And this next bit, which is in italics, and anything in the book that's in italics is important. But also, there's another little bit here. If you like the history, changes from the first edition. In the first edition, that read, "But the ex-alcoholic," and that was changed in the first 164 pages because why? It implied cure, and we don't believe we can be cured. So that was pointed out, and they changed it. So the ex-problem drinker who has found this solution, who is properly armed with the facts about himself, can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. Until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. And I think many of us will recognise ourselves in this little bit. I can remember having doctors telling me I needed to stop. I can remember having family friends telling me I probably should stop. None of that worked. But when somebody that had been through this and was properly armed with the facts, another alcoholic who had recovered, who actually understood the nature of the disease, they could talk to me because they got it. No one else did. That the man who is making the approach has had the same difficulty. That he obviously knows what he is talking about. That his whole deportment shouts at the new prospect that he is a man with a real answer, that he has no attitude of holier than thou, nothing of whatever except the sincere desire to be helpful, that there are no fees to pay, no axes to grind, no people to please, no lectures to be endured. It's a good checklist, that, isn't it? I think we need sometimes when we're working with a newcomer, we should remember these things. These are the conditions that we have found most effective. After such an approach, many take up their beds and walk again. None of us makes a sole vocation of this work, a vocation being a full-time job, so this is an avocation. This is something we do alongside everything else. Nor do we think its effectiveness would be increased if we did. We feel that the elimination of our drinking is but a beginning. A much more important demonstration of our principles lies before us in our respective homes, occupations and affairs. All of us spend much of our spare time in the sort of effort which we are going to describe. A few are fortunate enough to be so situated that they can give nearly all their time to the work. If we keep on the way we are going, that means if we carry on just not drinking, there is little doubt that much good will result. But the surface of the problem would hardly be scratched. Those of us who live in large cities are overcome by the reflection that close by hundreds are dropping into oblivion every day. Many could recover if they had the opportunity we have enjoyed. How then shall we present that which has been so freely given to us? We, again there's that word we again, many authors, this is the agreement of the first 100, subsequent thousands, we have concluded to publish an anonymous volume setting forth the problem as we see it. We shall bring to the task our combined experience and knowledge. This should suggest a useful program for anyone concerned with a drinking problem. Of necessity, there will have to be discussion of matters medical, psychiatric, social and religious. We are aware that these matters are from their very nature controversial. Nothing would please us so much as to write a book which would contain no basis for contention or argument. We should do our utmost to achieve that ideal. Most of us sense that real tolerance of other people's shortcomings and viewpoints and a respect for their opinions are attitudes which make us more useful to others. Our very lives as ex-problem drinkers depend upon our constant thought of others and how we may help meet their needs. So breaking down that, as well as going for this thing that we're going to have to help other people, is a key part of this program, passing this on. You may have already asked yourself why it is that all of us became so very ill from drinking. Doubtless you are curious to discover how and why, in the face of expert opinion to the contrary, we have recovered from a hopeless condition of mind and body. If you are an alcoholic who wants to get over it, you may already be asking, what do I have to do? It is the purpose of this book to answer such questions specifically. We shall tell you what we have done. That's the important bit here, isn't it? Because if we do what they do, we should get what they get, right? The book here isn't telling the newcomer what we think they should do. The book at no point says what you should do. It says what we have done. And if you do the same as we have done, you will get the same result as we have got. Before going into a detailed discussion, it may be well to summarise some points as we see them. How many times have people said to us, I can take it or leave it alone, why can't he? Why don't you drink like a gentleman or quit? That fellow can't handle his liquor. Why don't you try beer and wine? Lay off the hard stuff. His willpower must be weak. He could stop if he wanted to. She's such a sweet girl. I should think he'd stop for her sake. The doctor told him that if he ever drank again, it would kill him. But there he is, all lit up again. And as we said before, there are all those things that come under frothy emotional appeal, all those other reasons that very good reasons why we shouldn't have drunk, but they don't matter to us as an alcoholic. Now, these are commonplace observations on drinkers which we hear all the time. Back of them is a world of ignorance and misunderstanding. We see that these expressions refer to people whose reactions are very different from ours, in other words, non-alcoholics. This always makes me smile because I remember when I told my parents I had a problem with alcohol, and their whole attitude was, well, you just stop then. But that's the whole point. I can't. And they don't get that because to them, they can just stop. They're normal people. They're not wired the same as me. So now we get a description of a couple of different types of people with drinking problems. Moderate drinkers have little trouble in giving up liquor entirely if they have good reason for it. They can take it or leave it alone. Then we have a certain type of hard drinker. He may have the habit badly enough to gradually impair him physically and mentally. It may cause him to die a few years before his time. If a sufficiently strong reason, ill health, falling in love, change of environment, or the warning of a doctor becomes operative, this man can also stop or moderate, although he may find it difficult and troublesome and may even need medical attention. So what we're talking about here is a non-alcoholic. We're talking about someone that's got a problem with alcohol, but they're not an alcoholic in the sense we are, because they can stop or moderate under their own steam. They may need to get a medical detox, but after that they're going to be okay. They don't have the mental obsession that centres in our mind. So, what about the real alcoholic? He may start off as a moderate drinker. He may or may not become a continuous hard drinker. But at some stage of his drinking career, he begins to lose all control of his liquor consumption once he starts to drink. So what we're describing there is what? The phenomenon of craving that we've heard about earlier. Here is a fellow who has been puzzling you, especially in his lack of control. He does absurd, incredible, tragic things while drinking. He is a real Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He is seldom mildly intoxicated. He is always more or less insanely drunk. His disposition while drinking resembles his normal nature, but little. He may be one of the finest fellows in the world, yet let him drink for a day and he frequently becomes disgustingly and even dangerously antisocial. He has a positive genius for getting tight at exactly the wrong moment, particularly when some important decision must be made or engagement kept. He is often perfectly sensible and well balanced concerning everything except liquor, but in that respect, he is incredibly dishonest and selfish. He often possesses special abilities, skills and aptitudes and has a promising career ahead of him. He uses his gifts to build up a bright outlook for his family and himself, and then pulls the structure down on his head by a senseless series of sprees. And honestly, this is so talking about me right now, and I hope it's talking about you too, but this is exactly what I used to do. He is the fellow who goes to bed so intoxicated he ought to sleep the clock around, yet early next morning he searches madly for the bottle he misplaced the night before. If he can afford it, he may have liquor concealed all over his house to be certain no one gets his entire supply away from him to throw down the waste pipe. As matters grow worse, he begins to use a combination of high-powered sedative and liquor to quiet his nerves so he can go to work. That was something that we saw in both Bill and Bob's story, isn't it? Then comes the day when he simply cannot make it and gets drunk all over again. Perhaps he goes to a doctor who gives him morphine or some sedative with which to taper off. Then he begins to appear at hospitals and sanitariums. And what we're really talking about here, when it talks about there comes a day he simply cannot make it and gets drunk all over again, we're talking about the mental obsession has kicked in here. This is somebody that's come off the drink, but then the mental obsession kicks in and he can't stop. This is by no means a comprehensive picture of the true alcoholic, as our behaviour patterns vary, but this description should identify him roughly. Why does he behave like this? If hundreds of experience have shown him that one drink means another debacle with all its attendant suffering and humiliation, why is it he takes that one drink? Why can't he stay on the water wagon? What has become of the common sense and willpower that he still sometimes displays with respect to other matters? And that is because this person is now beyond human aid and they are trying to do it on self-will and they can't. Perhaps there will never be a full answer to these questions. Opinions vary considerably as to why the alcoholic reacts differently from normal people. We are not sure why, once a certain point is reached, little can be done for him. We cannot answer the riddle. Right? We don't have all the answers, we don't know all the whys. What we do know is that there's a solution and it works. We know that while the alcoholic keeps away from drink, he may do for months or years, he reacts much like other men. We are equally positive that once he takes any alcohol whatever into his system, something happens both in the bodily and mental sense, which makes it virtually impossible for him to stop. And there's that old, since Jamie's here, it's the old pickle and cucumber analogy right there, isn't it? Once you're a cucumber, you become a pickle. Once you're a pickle, you can't ever go back. The experience of any alcoholic will abundantly confirm this. These observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never took the first drink, thereby setting the terrible cycle in motion. Therefore, the main problem of the alcoholic centres in his mind rather than his body. If you ask him why he started on that last bender, the chances are he will offer you any one of 100 alibis. Sometimes these excuses have a certain plausibility, but none of them really make sense in the light of the havoc of an alcoholic's drinking bout creates. They sound like the philosophy of a man having a headache who having a headache beats himself on the head with a hammer so that he can't feel the ache. And if you draw this fallacious reasoning to the attention of an alcoholic, he will laugh it off or become irritated and refuse to talk. And that's exactly what I used to be like when people raised my drinking with me. I would laugh it off, I would just push it down, but there was no way anyone could get through to me. Once in a while, he may tell the truth. And the truth, strange to say, is usually that he has no more idea why he took that first drink than you have. Because he has no mental defence, right? Some drinkers have excuses with which they are satisfied part of the time. But in their hearts they really do not know why they do it. Once this malady has a real hold, they are a baffled lot. There is the obsession that somehow, someday they will beat the game, but they often suspect they are down for the count. How true this is, few realise. In a vague way, their families and friends sense that these drinkers are abnormal, but everybody hopefully awaits the day when the sufferer will rouse himself from his lethargy and assert his power of will. The tragic truth is that if the man be a real alcoholic, the happy day may not arrive. Why? Because he hasn't got that willpower, has he? He has lost control. At a certain point in the drinking of every alcoholic, he passes into a state where the most powerful desire to stop drinking is of absolutely no avail. This tragic situation has already arrived in practically every case long before it is suspected. Once again, someone that's beyond human aid. And this next paragraph is in italics, and anything in the book that's in italics is important. I think it's all important, but it's super important. The fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice in drink. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We are unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We are without defence against the first drink. Another word for that would be what? Powerless, right? We are powerless against that first drink. The almost certain consequences that follow taking even a glass of beer do not crowd into the mind to deter us. If these thoughts occur, they are hazy and readily supplanted with the old threadbare idea that this time we shall handle ourselves like other people. There is a complete failure of the kind of defence that keeps one from putting his hand on a hot stove. And that really is, like, you wouldn't do that, would you? You wouldn't put your hand on a hot stove. You know that's crazy. And yet that's exactly what we do as alcoholics when we go out and pick up that drink. Because we no matter how much we've sworn off last time, no matter how bad it was, in our mind that all gets romanticised and played down. The alcoholic may say to himself in the most casual way, "It won't burn me this time, so here's how." Or perhaps he doesn't think at all, which is probably more likely, isn't it? How often have some of us began to drink in this nonchalant way and after the third or fourth pounded on the bar and said to ourselves, "For God's sake, how did I ever get started again?" Only to have that thought supplanted by, "Well, I'll stop with a sixth drink," or "What's the use anyhow?" When this sort of thinking is fully established in an individual with alcoholic tendencies, he has probably placed himself beyond human aid, and unless locked up, may die or go permanently insane. And that's kind of where we get the jails, death and institutions thing from. That is where we're headed as alcoholics if we don't find a solution. These stark and ugly facts have been confirmed by legions of alcoholics throughout history. But for the grace of God, there would have been thousands more convincing demonstrations. So many want to stop, but cannot. Okay, so where are we on time? We're going to read the next paragraph or so, but we're going to start next week at this paragraph. But I'm going to read it this week so we end on a really good high point. There is a solution. Almost none of us like the self-searching, the levelling of our pride, the confession of shortcomings which the process requires for its successful consummation. In other words, the steps, right? But we saw that it really worked in others, and we had come to believe in the hopelessness and futility of life as we had been living it. When, therefore, we were approached by those in whom the problem had been solved, that is, other recovered alcoholics, there was nothing left for us to do but to pick up the simple kit of spiritual tools laid at our feet. That simple set of spiritual tools is what's in this book. It is the 12 steps. We have found much of heaven, and we have been rocketed into a fourth dimension of existence of which we had not even dreamed. In other words, we had a spiritual experience, a spiritual awakening. We're starting to see things that are outside the natural. We're seeing miracles, and we do see miracles in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. The great fact is just this and nothing less, that we have had deep and effective spiritual experiences, and that word's plural, which have revolutionised our whole attitude towards life, towards our fellows and towards God's universe. The central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that our Creator entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. He has commenced to accomplish those things for us which we could never do by ourselves. And that's a perfect place to leave it. So I will leave it there. Look forward to hearing your share backs on anything we've read tonight. Thank you very much.